respected him so much. It was his hometown, and I was actually getting knackered in that heat. They're used to it, and it was A-man's A, and I thought, well, what the hell, I'm going home tomorrow. So, and I don't mind telling you, 30 years ago, I got 982 quid.
Right, for the one match?
For the one match, and that's been my biggest payday ever.
Do you think that your trip to Mexico so early in your career influenced your style of wrestling later on in your career, the modernised style of British wrestling?
Yeah, it must have done, because other wrestlers and promoters saw my style as well, and they wanted me to go to their country as well as. So the floodgates opened there, and I was very rarely at home. But it was always nice to come home. But British style of wrestling, may I just tell you, Steve, is you mention any wrestler in the world, they have been to this country and learnt our style and took it back there. And it's like the modern day wrestling that they see on television, your Daniel Bryans and people, CM Punks and all them wrestlers, they, when they're travelling around the world, they just watch all our tapes. Because I know this, as I've trained a few lads, you know, like, and William Regal, he tells me everything, and Finlay I still keep in touch with. But there was always a feud in British wrestling. You had your McManus and Palo, you had the Big Daddy and A-Stacks, you had Marty Jones and Rocco, Rocco and Finlay and Jones. It happens in all sports, Manchester United, Manchester City, and people want to come and see them. But the British style, Andre the Giant, the eighth wonder of the world, I spent many, many hours with that guy in Japan. And he came, believe it or not, to Wigan to learn how to wrestle when he was 18.
Wow. And
not a lot of people know that, because what British style wrestling is, it's proper wrestling with a little bit of show. American wrestling is a lot of show, or it was a lot of show with a bit. You've got to be able to do the job. It's simple as that. These people that are learning wrestling off the television, they're going to get hurt. Simple as that.
You were known for being a great technician, like I said, the next generation of British wrestler, along with the likes of all the guys you just mentioned, the Finlays, the Marc Roccos. One of the names that I want to mention to you, a guy that holds a lot of mystery to a lot of people. When did you first hear or meet the Dynamite Kid, Tom Billington?
When did I first meet him? Very early on, and I'm pleased to say that I actually helped train Dynamite Kid. Because when Steve Wright, who I mentioned earlier in the interview, was from Warrington, his brother was Bernie Wright, who was friends with... Now, there's a guy, when I went to Wigan, like you mentioned, you go to other little gyms. Well, now there's one in every street corner. When I was 18, 19, there was none of these gyms, apart from the Rileys and Ryton Stadium, up north anyway. But there was one tucked away in Warrington, and a guy called Ted Betley. He was responsible for training Steve Wright and a lot of the Wigan rugby league players. So he asked me to come down and have a bit of that word against scurf a few of the rugby players around and teach pushing and pulling, which was good for their sport. And while I was there, Dynamite Kid and Davy Boy Smith was just starting off in the apprenticeship side of it. Now, Ted was from the Isle of Man. He was also responsible for training Johnny Savage, if you remember him.
I do, John Savage, yeah.
Yeah, so he had his own little school. And then it was Dynamite Kid who eventually got into America and did the British Bulldog thing, as you well know. And then, tragically, the rest is history about Davy Boy Smith. And Dynamite Kid, I only saw him only 2 months ago, and less said about him the better. It's a crying shame what I saw. But that is my own personal view. I don't like seeing people in wheelchairs through the wrestling job. I don't like seeing people that have given up on life. And I don't like, and it's a combination of things. Now, there's one thing I can honestly say, I was world champion and I defended it so many times, I'm proud of that. But there has never been a steroid put in my body. I've had a few fish and chips and a load of Guinness, but I've had no steroids. And when your natural body weight is only 14, 15 stone, and you balloon up to 22 stone, of pure muscle and solid rock like British Bulldogs were. As you know, Davy Boy Smith is no longer with us, and Dynamite, I can honestly say, is very, very poorly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I put it down to abusing the body, but it did make them a lot of money at the time.
Yeah, I know. There's a passage in a book I was reading recently from Bret Hart, which is another guy that you wrestled very early on, that Dynamite especially requested you to go out to Calgary and work with him a lot out there.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your time in Calgary?
Yeah, well, there was another gym out there. It was called the Dungeon. And this is all down to people, as I said at the start of the interview, the people that could actually wrestle as an Olympic wrestler. So they have their guys, and it's good, it's fantastic, but not the showman side of it. And what it is, Bruce Hart, Bret Hart, Owen Hart, Ross Hart, was all a big family. And they lived under the father's wing where they had the Dungeon up in Calgary. Well, obviously they did shows as well, and if you remember, there's a guy, an old elderly guy called John Foley.
Yeah.
He was like the manager of the Dynamite Kid and this. And then I went out there and did the same out there. And I loved it in Canada, and I had some epic matches with Bret Hart, and that's why he mentions me in his book. And I'm pleased to say when he does come over to Great Britain, he invites me to the show so we can catch up on things. But going back to your question, Bret and Owen and Bruce were obviously the Hart family. And then there was Dynamite Kid, myself, and Davy Boy Smith that we generated a lot of heat. And heat means a lot of reaction between us and them at the big shows. And that's why we had some hell of some good matches. We was all in our prime and they was in the prime. And if we just diverse a bit, when Owen Hart actually came over to this country, Ken Walton actually said in the match for Bradford where I was defending the world title, this is the best match he has ever commentated on, which, whatever Ken Walton said, if Steve Knight takes his false leg off and hits him over the head with it, the crowd would be watching. The viewers would be listening for that, but with him saying that, it's stuck in a lot of people's mind, you know.
Yeah, but I remember watching that match as probably a 12-year-old, and absolutely true, absolutely fantastic match.
Yeah, it was good, yeah.
If I said this to you, tell me your opinion. That there's a lot of wrestlers that would call wrestlers themselves and fans that would call Dynamite Kid the greatest wrestler of all time. What would you say to that, Marty?
Greatest wrestler of all time, no. And the reason why I say that, he was a terrific wrestler, but I class a terrific wrestler somebody that did amateur wrestling, somebody can do a little bit of show wrestling, and I class a wrestler, if he wants to do the show wrestling, he can do it, but also can handle himself. But I don't like Dynamite and Davy Boy Smith at the time were there at the right time. They were the first people to go over to America, and I missed my way because when I was over in Japan with Andre the Giant, Vince McMahon Sr., he wanted me to go to America, and I would have been one of the first in the modern era because you had Judah Valles, Tony Charles, and people like that. And at the time, I was travelling too much. I couldn't hold a job at home. And I decided against it because I didn't like the American style of wrestling at the time. But how wrong was I? Yeah. I could have earned a lot of money. And I wish I could turn back the clock now and say, yes, I'd like to go to America. But to be the greatest wrestler, if you said, is he one of the best wrestlers ever to come out of the UK, maybe in the top 5. Okay. But my view of a wrestler is somebody like Pete Roberts. Now, your listeners might not even... Pete Roberts, who's he? Yeah. And this is the problem that we've got between wrestlers, showmen, job men, which they have in boxing, they have in any sport. But to be a great wrestler, you know, somebody at 7'4" and weighing nearly 40 stone like Andre the Giant to still do what he does, Fujinami was a fantastic wrestler.
Yeah.
Davey Boy Smith was good. But when you get in your Roccos and your Finlays and myself in that bracket, yes, he was good. But to be the greatest is very, very difficult.
Japan was somewhere you went regularly. You were tagged with Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant. Tell us about how many tours of Japan did you do, Marty?
I did 6. The greatest memory was when, if you ever remember Muhammad Ali.
With Inoki,
Inoki, well, I was on that bill.
Right.
So that was one. And the other one is where I actually wrestled a guy who was a boxer, Chuck Webner.
Right.
It was like the build-up to this. But the matches with Fujinami and Kido, any British lad going over to Japan, I can honestly tell you didn't speak to your opponent. You didn't know who your opponent was until you went into the dressing rooms. You never travelled with them, and you used to, all them matches that you see on YouTube and all that, they were 110%. You knocked shit out of each other, and the problem is, that is where I got the bad legs from. Not, and I mean really kicking hell out of them, but the crowds that used to get there, you could hear a mouse break wind, and then all of a sudden they pop at the end of the rounds, and they knew exactly what they were doing. It was my style. It was good.
Yeah, a wrestling style, true wrestling style. In between doing all these fantastic places you were doing, you was obviously coming back to the UK.
Yeah.
Would you have been working for the Crabtrees at this point in time?
Yes, I was. Yeah, I worked for them all. And the reason being is there was always had Dale Martin's joint promotions. Well, when you was with joint promotions in the early days, you well know, you would get booked to go down to London for Dale Martin's, and you'd have a full week. You was away from home, and it was very, very hard, as you well know, keeping a job in this country, because I'd done driving instructor, I'd done worked at the meat market, I'd also done a window cleaning round. But then when the trips came, where the money was, you had to go.
Yeah.
So you lost your job, so you tried working for yourself, and but at the time, when I was coming back with the money I got, I actually invested it wisely. Well, I gave it to my dad, and he, put it into a bit of property. But as time goes on, you get married and have children, and your money goes. But Japan was special. I mean, if you got asked to go to Japan, it was an honour in them days. I mean, Japan's struggling now. They seem to have done everything, and they're not packing the crowds in anymore. But it's like fashion, isn't it? It swings and roundabouts. And that's what I was saying earlier about the world of sports style. I think it's coming back.
Absolutely is at the moment, yeah. What is it like, Marty? And I'm sure it's very difficult for anybody who never saw World of Sport to understand. World of Sport was massively popular. You were a bona fide celebrity. Literally 10 million people were watching you on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah.
And you needed another job during the week to make ends meet.
Yeah.
What is that like? What does that feel like to be famous but still need a job like a window cleaner and things? Is that heartbreaking?
Yeah, it is heartbreaking, because you have to. You see, when you get on television straight away, actresses, they're on mega money, this, that, and the other. In them days, I can honestly tell you got 40 quid.
Yeah. And
9 times out of 10, you have to make your own way there and back for that. But unfortunately, some of the wrestlers, no names mentioned, they would go on television for nothing, just to get their head on telly. I've been on with Big Daddy, I've done this and I've done that. But there wasn't a lot of money in wrestling. But from the promoter's point of view, if they saw Marty Jones versus Steve Knight on telly and they enjoyed it, and then it came to Oldham or it came to Lincoln or wherever, the people would go and watch it. It was our shop window.
Yeah.
But when you got, darts was very, very similar. Look at dart players now, since they've rabbitased it all up, just like the wrestling.
Exactly the same.
It's all down to viewing. Now, unfortunately, the guy came along called David Icke, I think he was called,
Greg Dyke, the chap.
Yeah, Greg Dyke. He's the one that said, we don't want wrestling, but